The Southampton Soccer Club didn't know much about Nile Ranger's checkered past, so the academy director was shocked when the club got a letter from the Crown Prosecution Service ordering a 15-year-old Nile Ranger to stand trial over armed robbery. The club talked to the judge about his talent and how he had begun to mend his ways, but the damage had already been done. Ranger was sentenced to 4 months in a young offender institution, which is basically prison for minors. When receiving his sentence, Nile nearly passed out and cried as he heard his aunt sobbing behind him. Her son, Michael, was joining him behind bars, and the two were going to be locked up for 23 hours a day. This was only the start of Nile Ranger's long rap sheet. Nile Ranger was once a successful Premier League soccer player, but his criminal behavior and legal issues destroyed his career and reputation. The Southend United player had a string of criminal convictions, including street robbery, fighting police officers, and criminal damage, but always found a way to avoid jail time. That was until 2017, when he pleaded guilty to online banking fraud and confessed to charges of conspiracy to defraud by obtaining bank details and transferring money. After years of teachers, coaches, teammates, and fans giving him chance after chance, Ranger had nowhere to hide, and it was time to face some consequences. According to a personal essay by Ranger, published on 442's website, he was always in trouble growing up. He cursed at teachers and fought with the other kids during recess. By the time he reached 5th grade, Ranger was expelled from school for hitting a teacher with a lunch tray, which almost broke one of her hands. For an obviously angry kid, it could have been worse if he didn't have soccer as his outlet. Ranger was only 10 years old when he was signed by Crystal Palace, a professional soccer team, and spent 2 years with the club before they released him for his bad behavior at school. Without soccer to fill his time, Ranger grew restless and turned to theft. While he was in 6th grade, he stole other students' cell phones and sold them to a group of Albanian men in a local park. For Ranger, the money was rolling in, both from him selling the stolen phones and using his allowance from his mom to feed his growing gambling habit. When Ranger turned 13, his teachers asked his mom to sit in the back of the classroom to try to fix his bad behavior. But it didn't work. Then, in 8th grade, he was expelled again, this time for messing with his classmates with a Bunsen burner. Ranger's only option was to enroll in the Octagon, a school for kids with learning difficulties or behavioral problems. Although Ranger's life off the soccer pitch was tumultuous, it was a different story when he was on the pitch. Soccer gave him something to strive for and be proud of, and he joined Haringey Borough, a semi-professional team. Playing for the team gave him a place to channel his energy, but he couldn't stop mixing with a bad crowd. Ranger was among a group of boys that robbed a nearby high school. He was arrested, put on 7 months of probation, and given a curfew. But the curfew didn't slow him down. He repeatedly broke it to rob more houses, so his mom reported him to the police, and he was fitted with an ankle monitor. Ranger still found a way to sneak out when he discovered that he could use dish soap to remove the device, creating the illusion that he was still at home while roaming the streets. However, the trouble off the field was matched by his success on the field, as his soccer career flourished. He joined Romford FC, another semi-professional club, and enrolled at a soccer academy run by Danny Shitu, a former professional soccer player. When he wasn't training, Ranger was gambling, stealing, or smoking a particular type of green plant. Not long into his time at Romford, Ranger was caught red-handed stealing his teammate's cell phone in the locker room. Shitu found the phones in Ranger's bag and confronted him, asking how they got in the soon-to-be professional player's backpack. Although Ranger denied stealing the phones, Shitu didn't believe him and banned Ranger from the academy. He might have been more upset if it wasn't for the fact that his earlier burglary charges were dropped around the same time. But rather than lay low, Ranger celebrated the charges being dropped by hopping on a bus and stealing more phones. Like you do. Once they finished on one bus, they jumped onto another and did the same thing. The crew had a massive stack of phones, but decided they needed even more and ran down a street, snatching people's cells from their hands. When a police car raced towards them, the guys panicked and ran away, throwing their massive haul into nearby bushes. Officers found the gang's stash and arrested Ranger for armed robbery. He was released on bail, but not even facing serious jail time could stop him from resisting the temptation to keep stealing. Ranger continued breaking his curfew, and when law enforcement found a stolen iPod in his possession, they arrested him again. Ranger's mom, who was at her wit's end, was ready to throw him out, but he begged for another chance. So she sent him to a soccer academy at Southgate College, which had connections with professional clubs, hoping he would straighten out. Ranger's talent on the field was undeniable. After he scored twice during a preseason match, winning his team the game, his coach received a call from Southampton FC, who were impressed by Ranger's performance. So he trained with Southampton's youth team, and within days, they offered him a 2-year scholarship. The club covered his accommodations and paid him $135 a week. Although he was far from the temptations of his old life, he still snuck out of his housing at night to go clubbing, forcing his landlord to report his actions to the club. Southampton was unaware of Ranger's past, and minus finding him for sneaking out, they had no reason to believe he was in trouble. Then, the academy director received a letter from the Crown Prosecution Service with Ranger's court date for his trial over the armed robbery charges. Ranger's soccer career went on pause when he was sentenced to 4 months in a juvenile detention center. He was released 2 months into his sentence and returned to Southampton. This time, he lived in an apartment with his mother so she could keep him in line. Ranger had a promising return to the sport, but again, couldn't stop himself from stealing other people's things. He stole other players' cleats, a staff member's box of chocolates, and a training kit. He hid them in a bush with plans to take them to London, but a coach found them. Ranger begged for a second chance, but the team's manager kicked him out of the club. However, sports agents weren't concerned about how his time at Southampton ended and flooded him with offers. He received an exciting offer from Swindon, but his agent asked to meet him at a nearby Burger King. Newcastle wanted to sign Ranger and would pay him 3 times what Swindon was offering, plus a sign-on fee. Although the offer was enticing, Ranger wasn't sure if he wanted to be that far away from home. Eventually, Newcastle's executive director convinced him to take the deal. Ranger stayed at the team accommodations and followed a strict routine, which gave him some much-needed structure. Months after Ranger's time in prison, he was on the bench of a Premier League game against Arsenal. Ranger traveled by private jet with the soccer elite. At the end of his contract, the club rewarded him with a 3.5-year deal worth $12,000 a week and bonuses for scoring goals and making appearances. He played in his first match in August 2009, but didn't score a goal until December of that year. Ranger enjoyed staying up late to go clubbing and spent most of his free time in casinos. He struggled to turn up to training on time, resulting in friction between him and the club's manager, Chris Houghton. Ranger gambled away $36,000 in 2 months and borrowed another $85,000 from his teammates. When the club found out, they banned him from every casino in Newcastle and warned him of the dangers of gambling. When Ranger received a $115,000 bonus, he spent most of it on a new Range Rover, despite his teammates driving old, beat-up cars. He ignored the people around him who advised him against elaborate purchases and not letting the success get to his head. Ranger's behavior off the pitch was an inconvenience to the club, but his performance outshone any issues he caused, at least for a while. In 2010, a club official pulled him aside to let him know that several tabloid newspapers were going to print a picture of him holding a gun. The image was his WhatsApp profile picture, and the club responded by fining him 2 weeks of pay. But then, 3 months later, Newcastle handed him a 5-year contract. So Ranger thanked the club by driving under the influence during a midweek night out. Ranger was driving his girlfriend home when the police pulled him over and breathalyzed him. He was over the legal limit and spent the night locked in a cell. Ranger received a $3,600 fine and was banned from driving for a year. Around that time, Newcastle got a new manager, Alan Pardew, who walked in already sick of Ranger's behavior. After things already weren't going great with Pardew, Ranger ended up in court again. He got into a fight with 2 guys after some words were exchanged, and of course, the cops came. The police attempted to arrest Ranger for the incident, causing him to panic and shove them away. So, boom! He was then charged for fighting both men and the police officer. He pleaded guilty but luckily security camera footage supported his version of events and he was cleared of all charges. Then Ranger was arrested again in January 2013 on suspicions of an assault on a woman after a night out. Ranger insisted that it was nothing more than a one-night stand, but the dire accusation was made. Newcastle canceled his contract. Teams weren't as forgiving of Ranger's behavior this time, with few wanting to be associated with the disgraced player. He spent 5 months as a free agent before signing a 12-month deal with Swindon for a quarter of his salary at Newcastle. He performed well when he turned up for training, but was frequently late and sometimes completely absent. Ranger was cleared of the charges, but had little time to celebrate as he was soon behind bars again for hitting a female friend when he was drunk. Although she didn't press charges, Ranger received a fine for property damage as he kicked the door of his apartment that night when he lost his keys. Swindon terminated his contract and he moved on to Blackpool, a town known for partying and gambling. So, a good move on that one. Although he made barely any money compared to earlier in his career, he was desperate. When the squad left Ranger out of a home game, he decided to go home to London and stayed there for 6 months. The club fined him for every game he missed, but he didn't care and was shocked when they extended his contract anyway. He turned up 4 weeks late and they made him train alone. Ranger apologized publicly for his behavior, but the club released him in February 2016. His next move was to Southend, where his biggest scandal came to light. In February 2015, Ranger conspired to use a woman named Diane Bloss's bank information and move $2,500 from one account to another. He obtained the details of Bloss's online HSBC account and used them to transfer money into a Santander account. The crime had two facets: acquiring the details for the fraud and what happened with the money when it was transferred. Although Ranger pleaded guilty to conspiracy to defraud, he pleaded not guilty to a separate money laundering charge. Ranger was found guilty and was sentenced to 8 months in jail. After 10 weeks behind bars, he was released for good behavior, but had to wear an ankle monitor for 5 weeks and had a 7 p.m. curfew, meaning he couldn't play evening games. Southend stuck by Ranger, and he played 21 times during the first half of the 2017-2018 season, but the club decided to terminate his contract due to his constant lateness. Ranger trained with Oxford in 2018, but refused a contract because he didn't like the terms. Another club, Rochdale, offered him $1,220 a week, but since the club wanted him to live with a teammate and his girlfriend to make sure he didn't fall back into his old habits, he turned down the offer as well. Instead, he moved home to live with his mom and played 5-a-side several times a week to stay fit. A far cry from his days in the Premier League. According to his essay on 442's website, posted in February 2023, he hopes and prays for one last chance. With him burning so many bridges, the question is, who will give it to him? If you're enjoying this video, be sure to stay right here to find out about the crazy life of former baseball superstar Lenny Dykstra. Nile Ranger's story shows the problems that come from sports teams excusing too much bad behavior just because someone's good at a game. For some people, sports is an outlet and a way out of a bad situation. With a lot of luck and the right amount of work, many have been able to lift themselves and their families out of poverty, and we can all agree that this is good. But problems come when old habits follow, and we're quick to forgive bad behavior. Would Nile have been better off if he never got all the extra chances he did? It's hard to say where he would have ended up or what his life would have been like, so we have no way of knowing. But because Nile was good at kicking a soccer ball, he was forgiven repeatedly, given chances he wouldn't have otherwise gotten, and was able to squander more opportunities than most of us will ever even get. Nile is just another casualty chewed up and spat out by the sports industry. If he had continued to be great, or had shown up to a few more practices, he'd still be awarded contracts. When he can't play well anymore, he's tossed aside with all his problems for the next big thing that has less problems, and the machine moves on. Ultimately, the lesson here is that really, people, like these sports teams, don't really care about anything other than what you can do for them. Nile Ranger could get fans and seats by helping his club win games. Making the owners rich, they didn't care about his mile-long rap sheet until it became a PR issue. Ultimately, of course, Ranger is the one who's accountable, as he's the only one that's going to have to pay for the consequences.
Lenny Dykstra was once on top of the world. He was a famous baseball player with the New York Mets and the Philadelphia Phillies, playing 12 seasons before he retired. Once he got out of baseball, Lenny went down several different paths, most of which weren't great. He started a car wash with his brother, making more than $1 million a year. Lenny thought it was a great investment because people always needed their cars washed. He and his company would never become irrelevant. He'd later sell the business at a huge profit, but lost it all. Even though Lenny already had a multi-million-dollar home, he had to have a better one. He set his sights on Canadian hockey legend Wayne Gretzky's former mansion and paid a cool $14 million for it. He joined Wall Street leader Jim Cramer to trade stocks, writing an advice column filled with baseball metaphors and all. At one point, Lenny even became an investment advisor. People paid him nearly $1,000 to get his opinions, but he said it was a steal. He claimed that people who invested with him earned $250,000 in a year based on his advice. On the surface level, everything seemed okay. Lenny's career wasn't suffering after he retired from baseball, and he was making a go of it. Unfortunately, not everything was as it seemed. Lenny earned the nickname Nails during his baseball career. He was a force to be reckoned with in the late 1980s through the mid-1990s. He played with absolute abandon, running into walls and projecting a persona of greatness. It was hard to believe Lenny was anything short of amazing. Maybe Lenny manifested his greatness for a time. Lenny split his 12-year career between the Mets and the Phillies. He was a 3-time All-Star player, and one year he came in second place for MVP behind Barry Bonds. Lenny was on the New York Mets in 1986 when they won the World Series, thanks to Bill Buckner's career-altering mistake. While it wasn't his hit that won the game, Lenny was a powerhouse leadoff hitter who played a big role in the team's success. He hit a walk-off home run in Game 3 of the National League Championship Series that's still considered one of the best plays in franchise history and of his career. In 1989, Lenny was traded to the Phillies. He wasn't happy at first, but the fans quickly welcomed him. However, his career declined in 1991 after Lenny was injured in a drunk driving accident. After leaving a party, he crashed into a tree, injuring himself and his teammate, Darren Daulton. Lenny hurt his ribs, broke his cheekbone, and fractured his collarbone. He was out 2 months due to his injuries, only to sit out again a few months later when he re-broke his collarbone running into a wall in Cincinnati. This injury put him out for the rest of the season. Lenny was ready to take on the next year, but he was hit by a pitch on opening day and broke his hand. Over 2 years, he played just 145 out of 324 games. The next year, Lenny finally got his career back on track. He even led the Phillies to the World Series, though they lost to the defending champion Toronto Blue Jays. 20 years later, we learned Lenny paid private investigators $500,000 to dig up dirt on MLB umpires. He used that dirt to get a better strike zone during games. It's no wonder he led the league in walks and made the All-Star team 3 years running. Lenny played his last game in 1996, but he didn't officially retire until 1998. He didn't just blackmail the umpires. He also took performance-enhancing drugs to give him a competitive edge. His life unraveled when he was named in the Mitchell Report, along with 88 other current and former players in December 2007. Regardless of the proof, Lenny didn't meet with the investigators to discuss the allegations raised against him. However, multiple sources outed him, including his brother. Lenny had sold their successful car wash business for $51 million and screwed his brother Kevin out of $4 million. In retaliation, Kevin cooperated with investigators and told them all about Lenny's use. Because he wasn't playing anymore, no charges were brought against him. Lenny later admitted to using PEDs in a book called The Zeros by Randall Lane. He said he thought he needed to do something to keep him playing at high levels while he got older. Otherwise, he'd get replaced. While the Mitchell Report exposed his past, Lenny tried to make a future in stock trading. His skill was even endorsed by Jim Cramer on CNBC's Mad Money. A lifelong Phillies fan, Jim gave him his own stock investment column on TheStreet.com. At $999.95 a pop, customers would pay for Lenny to impart his wisdom, and they did. Some questioned his skills, but he was the real deal. According to his co-workers, Lenny followed about 100 stocks and had a research assistant to help him with the others. He made picks himself based on his knowledge and intuition and was doing really well. Then he got greedy. It was always something with Lenny. He was looking for bigger and better things. He pivoted to another career, hoping to publish a new magazine tailored to people just like him, former athletes looking to live the high life. His short-lived stock trading career was over. Lenny Lenny swung for the fences with the Players Club and missed. He overcommitted, trying to lump an upscale magazine, charter jet service, concierge service, and brokerage and investment service all in one neat package. These efforts were targeted toward current and former professional athletes. He rolled all of his car wash money into this business venture, all 51 million of it. Lenny was so confident in the Players Club that he borrowed money left and right. He even made more than $32,000 worth of charges on an employee's personal credit card. Lenny paid his employees late, stiffed the printers, and cut corners anywhere he could. As the business spiraled, he'd scream at his employees, badgering them at all hours of the night. He behaved erratically, and his relationships deteriorated faster than his magazine in a deep puddle. Gone were the measured, calculated decisions. The Wall Street wonder was no more. Instead, Lenny turned to lies and cons. He conned his mom, nephew, and other family members out of money, and they eventually cut him off and out of their lives. Lenny was on his way to rock bottom. At the height of his career, Lenny had a net worth of more than $58 million. Unfortunately, after a series of bad decisions, Lenny filed for bankruptcy. He claimed that he had only $50,000 worth of assets, but had more than $30 million in liabilities. Despite the best intentions, the Players Club had been a colossal failure. Instead of being the CEO of a successful company, Lenny sat atop a mountain of debt owed to various banks and creditors. All his car wash, baseball, and investing money was gone. His home was a wreck, and Lenny was accused of lying under oath and hiding assets to make his situation sound worse than it really was. Instead of facing his punishment and staying clean, Lenny continued to act out. In the months following his conviction, Lenny was charged with identity theft, drug possession, grand theft auto, lewd behavior, and providing false financial statements. He also faced accusations of passing bad checks and fraud. In the end, Lenny received a 3-year sentence for all of his criminal behavior. By August 2009, Lenny had hit rock bottom. He was living out of his car, in hotel lobbies, basically anywhere that would let him squat rent-free. His once dream home was in disrepair. It had water damage, missing toilets, torn up flooring and countertops, and other significant damage. He owned a second property, but it was covered in toxic mold. One of the houses was so bad that it was filled with trash and even raw sewage. Vandals made their way in, stripping the house of any valuable pieces of electric wiring. When they left, the home was a shell of what it used to be. Lenny sold his World Series ring to help pay off his debt, but it only raised about $57,000, a drop in the $31 million bucket. Eventually, his case went to bankruptcy court to help liquidate his estate and pay down the creditors. Unfortunately, Lenny fell on old habits, lying under oath and hiding assets. Because of that, he couldn't get his bankruptcy discharged by the courts. Lenny never caught a break. In 2011, he was arrested for grand theft to buy a stolen car. The next day, he was charged with embezzlement. Prosecutors alleged that after he filed for bankruptcy, he got rid of more than $400,000 worth of items from his home without permission, including fixtures, furnishings, and memorabilia. At one point, he even brought a truckload of items to a consignment store. He gutted his homes and either sold or destroyed everything he thought he could get away with. It didn't matter to Lenny as long as it was gone. Lenny was put on house arrest after the bankruptcy fraud. He faced up to 80 years in prison if convicted of all the charges lobbied against him. Eventually, in June of 2012, Lenny pled guilty to 3 felonies. He admitted to bankruptcy fraud, money laundering, and concealing assets. He admitted to getting rid of the more than $400,000 worth of assets that were part of the original filing. In the end, Lenny got 6.5 years of prison time and 500 hours of community service. He was also to pay $200,000 in restitution. Everyone hoped that Lenny would lay low after his conviction, but that wasn't to be. All was quiet for the first few years. Lenny was officially off probation in 2014, and as a condition of his release, he was to undergo weekly drug tests. In 2016, he was in the tabloids again for the promotion and the release of his new book, House of Nails. No one really heard from him until 2018, when he was back in the news. Lenny alleged an Uber driver tried to kidnap him. He was in fear of his life because the driver locked the doors and sped up. The driver disagreed with Lenny's account and instead told police that Lenny held him up at gunpoint. No gun was recovered because apparently Lenny just put his hand in a black plastic bag with a random object object and put it to the driver's head to scare him. The body cam from the incident was released by the New Jersey State Police. The once beloved MLB player had been reduced to almost nothing. He has been the butt of an ongoing prank phone call joke with Barstool Sports. They call his personal cell phone and ask him vulgar questions until he hangs up, usually cursing them out along the way. If that's the only reason Lenny is in the news, his life may be turning around, but you never know with Lenny. He just keeps getting crazier and crazier.
Like to watch one of these next videos? Let us know in the comment section whether or not you think there's such a thing of an athlete getting paid too much.